This space addresses very personal and vulnerable life topics delivered with an element of comedy that many will find repulsive. This is also an incredibly spiritual podcast born through the experiences of an oracle, a house witch, and a unicorn. It is intended for open-minded adults only. Maturity is not required. Welcome to the Spectral Expansion Experience. Come grow with me. See. Welcome to the Spectral Expansion Experience. I'm your host, Amanda. And what I'd like to do on today's podcast is, getting through those seasonal things. So I'm going to sound a little nasally and kind of coughy and kind of wheezy. And so thank you for bearing with me, as I'm sure many are going through that right now. So this is the Spectral Expansion Experience. This is a brand new podcast I've launched. It is a project of the Peaceful Tigress. That is my company. I am the Peaceful Tigress. And I did not introduce that in my last podcast that I launched with my best friend on the 6th of January, which was a Friday. That was our full moon in Cancer, and that was a really fun podcast. So on the first Friday of every month, I will have my best friend come on and co-host with me, and it is the Mandy and Dumpling Show. That is what we call each other. It's what we have always called each other for the last 33 years of our relationship. No, we are not life partners. We are both individually married, but it does confuse some because we certainly have chemistry, and she is certainly quite amazing and has so much to add to this program. But she is on her own endeavors and business adventures, and so she gets to grace us with her presence once a month. And every once in a while, she can pop in here and there. So on the first Friday of every month is the Mandy and Dumpling Show edition. So that's what you saw on Friday, the 6th, at the top of the year 2023 on our full moon in Cancer. And what came up out of that was what we ended on, what our theme was what the full moon was pulling up for us emotionally. And I won't go back into that. You can listen to that. It's 23 minutes of your life. So if you're interested in listening to that so you can pick up here, then I would highly advise that. So the thing that we landed on was being comfortable with uncertainty. And that was what was showing up for me in the full moon in Cancer. That's what the invitation was I was realizing that my biggest vulnerability from all my childhood traumas collectively was being comfortable with uncertainty. And so what did that look like for me? So how that was showing up for me in my life was my inability to allow things, to literally allow things. And so, one of the biggest things I want to unpack when we're sitting with uncertainty is I want to talk about the science behind it and how it literally disrupts our ability and our executive functioning and affects our ability to sustain relationships, to sustain high functioning levels at work, to sustain emotional stability. And so I want to go into what the art of allowance is, because we've heard it. We've all heard the art of allowance, right? But I want to talk about what it has to do with uncertainty and some of the behaviors that I exhibit and that have been exhibited through my family through uncertainty and being uncomfortable is the need to control. So that showed up for me. So I was saying, okay, I have this vulnerability that was born from all these life traumas, and we'll get into those. You'll learn who I am and where I come from as these podcasts go. So I have a wealth of knowledge and experience that I bring to you, and I do have a crazy sense of humor. So if you're offended, bye. So anyway, I have these experiences, and what I decided on the full moon in Cancer and what spirit showed up for me was that born of these uncertainties throughout my life, just being railed with them, who was going to be my next stepdad? When was my mom going to try to kill herself again? Who was going to, how are we going to get money? How are we going to put food on the table? I was a mother by the time I was 14. I did open adoption. And then I had my second baby by the time I was 16. I had a very controlling grandfather, my late grandfather who just passed away, who would have incredible angry outbursts because he did not know how to sit with uncertainty. And so and same with my mother, my late mother, God bless her. They're all over the rainbow now, but, and we've talked. They know I'm going to use them as examples. And I really appreciate the opportunity to learn from this and to grow from this because I really think it is my life path to share with you because I can embrace it in such a new way now. And or I'm learning. It still shows up. So these things showed up, these patterns, and so I can pull them all apart. I can tell you about my mother, I can tell you about my grandfather, I can tell you about all these different things and what I went through and what I witnessed that kind of made me scared of uncertainty, made me scared of not knowing what was around the corner. And in order to mitigate that fear, I would introduce things like avoidant behavior, staying away from places or doing people or doing things or conversations that needed to be had or gone to because I was afraid of not knowing what would happen or what the outcome would be or what my reaction to the outcome would be. Okay, a fear of my own reaction, my own reactivity that wasn't healthy, right? I wasn't responsive, I was reactive. And so, in order to navigate through these really uncomfortable challenges, I became very inflexible, and the need to control is how this manifested for me. Living in my uncertainty and being uncomfortable with it and not daring to address it came out and manifested for me as a way, in a way that was a need to control. And so I want to talk to you today about the art of allowance. And I want to unpack that from that podcast because it was so important to me. And I want to talk to you about the art of allowance. And then I want to talk to you in our next podcast about how we can shift into the art of allowance, which ends with high functioning perspective. So I've been talking about that, and I talked about that on my last podcast, and I talked about some of these things in my tarot, which is a different platform. But it's so important. I end on high functioning perspective, but I'm going to tell you why. And first, I'm going to explain to you about the art of allowance. So, we've all heard the term control freak and the familiar sayings like, once you surrender control, everything seems to fall into place. We've heard that. I know you've heard that. Just surrender, just release control, and everything in your life will just fall into place. And for many of us, this is too simple a proverb. Our complex minds and need for immediate gratification and confirmation simply won't allow this to be true. Okay? I'm just going to repeat that. Okay? So, we've all heard the saying, once you surrender control, everything seems to fall into place, or some version of that, right? It's just so easy to throw that out there, on a poster with a kitten on it. So we've all heard that, but for many of us, this is too simple a proverb. Our complex minds and a need for immediate gratification and confirmation simply will not allow this to be true for us. But it is true. It is true. And I will explain this to you. And I will explain why this is true and why, and the science behind why things more easily fall into place when control is indeed surrendered. So, here's three things that the need to control does in people's life. These are three major things. So, the need to control every outcome in a situation hijacks your executive functioning. It creates interpersonal strain, and it creates stress responses that induce physical health dilemmas that can become critical. I know this to be true because I'm going through it, and I watched my mother go through it, and I'm watching other people go through it right now in my little environment, in my external environment, and in my internal one. Okay, I know this to be true. These stress responses induce physical health dilemmas that become critical, friends. And so it is my desire to provide some sort of information for you or invite you to understand through my journey and through my education. I was a psychology major, and through my experiences, uh, how I have come to understand the art of allowance and how I stepped into the art of allowance. Okay, what is my need to control doing to me? And the answer to it is the art of allowance. And how you get to the art of allowance is high functioning perspective. Okay, so that's the hierarchy. But we're gonna fall into the art of allowance. So we're gonna stick with this. So the need to control every outcome hijacks your executive functioning. It creates interpersonal strain, and it creates a stress response that is detrimental to our health, our physical health, right? And so, excuse me. Let's talk about executive functioning. So, controlling every aspect of our life and situations creates a stress that hijacks our executive functioning. So, what's executive functioning? So, executive functions are cognitive tasks in the brain that support so many necessary skills needed in our daily lives. These skills include things like planning, organizing, problem solving, um, creative responses to challenges. That's problem solving. But sometimes problem solving can be real easy, and sometimes it needs a really creative solution, right? So I still stand by that. So problem solving, creative responses to challenges. Executive functions influence our thoughts and our behaviors. When this function is dysregulated, friends, in any way, it causes us to operate from a limiting scope, right? Our peripherals are narrowed in. We cannot see outside the box. And so that stresses and depresses our ability to think abstractly. We can't and consider potential creative solutions. Okay, this isn't pseudoscience. This is real. This is a real physiological event that is taking place in the brain. Okay, this is a real event that's taking place in the brain. So, executive functioning operates from our prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex. Pick up any textbook; you can look that up. So, when someone is in a tizzy, friends, trying to control every aspect of life and relationships, then a stress response arises. Okay, a stress response arises. And from our adrenal glands, and this releases levels of toxins, and this disrupts and impairs how the prefrontal cortex operates. Okay, everything is connected. Everything, and this is so hard for people to understand. It's just too simple of a solution. Now, I'm not saying it's simple to apply it, but once you have awareness, it almost gives you a permission, doesn't it? Uh, More on that later. Okay, so when these toxins that disrupt and impair how our prefrontal cortex operates, then we become it becomes inundated with these stress hormones and cognitive functioning and memory and situational flexibility and all these things we need to be at our tippy top and peak performance and to align with our greatest good on this earth experience that we're having as humans is depressed and immobilized. This is real. The art of allowance is real. Yeah, I'm a woo woo guru, but I'm telling you real shit, people. The art of allowance is real. Yes, I identify as an oracle or seer. Yes, I am a house witch. That's for another episode. That one's more fun. We have fun. I promise you, we have fun. But I know people are going to hear me talk about things. I'm going to mention them just like in the last podcast. And people are going to say, well, unpack that for me. How is that applicable? What does that look like? And I'm not always going to get to that in every podcast. We're going to have some fun, but I will come back. I will come back with all my notes and everything that I want to do so I can help you through some of these things that I'm throwing out here, because that's the whole point, is the spectral expansion experience. So while I'm leaning into science right now, this is a very spiritual podcast founded in non-dogmatic practices, and I lean into spirit like there is no tomorrow. So you're going to just hear a mixture, hodgepodge of all kinds of crazy shit. And I promise you, it will serve you if you let it. It will serve you if you let it. Okay. So we are talking about depressing and immobilizing our situational flexibility, our cognitive functioning, our memory, our stress hormones, right? We're talking about our prefrontal cortex and science, and blah, 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 blah. So this disabling of our superpower, right? Our executive functioning is our superpower. The art of allowance is our superpower. So the disabling of the superpower that we need to be successful in life hinders how we show up in lives in our lives for obligations that require problem solving and thoughtful response rather than reactive ones. So responding, not reacting. Let me just be clear. Rather than um, reactive ones. So thoughtful response. Okay. So um, this is a superpower. This executive functioning is a superpower. There are real things going on in our body. There are real physiological things and changes that are going on in our body when we are in such a need to control, when we are in such a limited state, right? It's completely destabilizing and it's very restrictive and it feels like shit. And then when somebody says, well, just allow, it almost makes people angry. But or don't feel like shit. Whatever. Let's go. Let's keep going. So the need to control every aspect of our life and our inability to let go can create interpersonal strain. So that was one of the three things I said. I can hijack your executive functioning, and I explained why. And then I want to talk about your interpersonal strain. Excuse me. So the inflexibility that arises out of this brain response that we just talked about from the need to control diminishes the lines of communications and trust with others, you guys. So parents, and I'm talking to myself here, parents who try, and yes, sometimes I will get shaken up on this because I told you, while I bring an element of comedy and I poke fun at a lot of things that most people will find lewd and crude, um, it is how I get through uh, life's funny wrenches that it likes to throw, right? This experience, this crazy experience. This is how I expand, is I am able to laugh at many things that people aren't. But in the same vein, to wit, I also get choked up because these all come from personal experiences. So I'm not just combining education and ancillary studies and my passion and love of spirituality and my own pilgrimage from the last 15 years, but these are mine too. So please bear with me if I ever have to take a minute. So let's keep going. Parents who try to control every aspect of their children's lives, and journeys will more often find a repressive child unwilling to communicate for fear of reprimand or that their words will fall on dense and unyielding ears when truly lines of communication are crucial in child development. Okay? I had to write this one down. These are my words, people, but this was important to me. I wanted to make these points. And so lines of communication are crucial in child development, right? And how many of us can raise our hands and say, and especially, I'm almost in my 40s, newer generation, and do not get me wrong, do not get me wrong. These young kids coming up, I'm absolutely have their own dilemmas and their own life events to navigate. And certainly, parents don't come with a manual. Parenting's there isn't one. There's books out there about parenting, but there's no real manual because that's not a one size fits all. It's very irresponsible. Anyway, parents who try to control every aspect of their child's lives and journeys will more often find a repressive child unwilling to communicate for fear of reprimand. And how many times do you see that in your adult life today? Do we see that in our adult life today? So that was one of my fears of uncertainty, is afraid to take up space and just allowing what would happen if I said something that was on my heart and mind, allowing what would happen if I took up space, allowing the reactions or responses of others, allowing uh, an opportunity that it might even be positive, or allowing myself space to be okay if it's not positive, if it's not the direction, right? So just being in that uncertain space. And a lot of that affected my communication. Okay, I have been fearful to take up space verbally, right? I'm afraid of reprimand. There's uncertainty. If I launch this podcast and I speak my truth about my spiritual beliefs, then everybody who has known me since I was a little girl, or who knows my mother, who identifies as Christian or some sort of organized, structured religion, or who will they love me? Will they hear me? Will they see me? Will I be accepted? It scares me. I'm uncertain. Will family members be repulsed by me? Will the community and the tribe that my late mother built, when I go on to ask for support, will I be shunned because I don't identify or align with certain things? So it's afraid of taking up space. It's afraid to be, and that is vulnerable. That is vulnerable. That feels scary, right? That's uncertain. We don't know. But what if I just allowed it? What if I just posted this shit anyway and said, you know what? I give it to the divine. I have to take up space this way. I have to speak my truth. I have to allow myself my authentic journey. Everybody, everybody should be allowed the dignity of their own journey. And that's on a tarot card. I didn't write that one, people. I wish I did. Everyone should be allowed the dignity of their own journey. Okay, so this is how it shows up for me. Okay, so let's get back on course. And so here's another example about interpersonal communications and relationships, interpersonal strain, as far as our second point. So we talked about hijacking executive functioning, and now we're talking about the need to control every aspect of our life and situation creates these interpersonal strains. And so we've all known, or we might be them, the one person that can only function on crystal clear, solidified plans, and that goes into almost near cardiac arrest if adjustments have to be made, or if you have to cancel, change a venue, change the time, tell someone you can't show up, or whatever it is. We all know that person who goes into just near cardiac arrest. And that is the result of a depressed executive function. Okay? That panic, that that you have to squirm almost, and your heart starts racing and your armpits are sweating even if you're cold and you have goosebumps, and all of these physical responses, people. Your body is trying to talk to you. How that's not real, I will never understand. How you will deny the sweats, the heart race, and not everybody does. But when I tell you that my simple solution is the art of allowance, and I say that is just too simple a proverb for people to buy into, then I'm saying that they are ignoring the communication that is going on, that is very much trying to tell them, hey, wake up, wake up. I'm nudging you. I'm talking to you. But we don't want to align with that, right? So these panic attacks stem from the need to control, that stem from the fear of uncertainty, that creates this deep vulnerability, right? So I want to make sure that we're understanding the structure here. Is the result of a depressed executive function that is brought on by the stress response induced by the need to control. So now you can just use your imagination, friends, to even consider the implications of work relationships, family dynamics, friendship dynamics, just your own personal relationship with yourself. Okay? People might not feel heard or feel reciprocation when faced with someone who is trapped in the confinement of control. You know? So I'm really encouraging you guys, and I'm saying this as I'm sweating now. I am nervous. I am vulnerable. I can feel it. It is 66 degrees in my house because my husband is a polar bear, and I am sweating right now, and I am already feeling vibration. So my nervous system is stepping online, and I can feel this is triggering for me because it's so real and it's still so present. And it's been such a heavy theme throughout this week. Every reading, it's almost annoying. Here I'm trying to launch this podcast. I'm trying to launch these YouTube videos, and I'm working through this huge vulnerability that I just discovered. And so I'm using it. This is what I'm leveraging as material uh, to get this going, to launch this, because it is so present in my life right now. And maybe it is for you. And maybe it is for you. So, the last point I want to make about the art of allowance is it creates a stress response that induces physical health dilemmas that can become critical. Okay. So, it breeds within us. Excuse me. I promise my sickness is getting better. I'm not even sick. It's just the residual leftover annoying blah, blah, blah. Um, so the final point is this need to control breeds a stress within us that can have serious physical implications. It compromises not just our mental health, such as our compromised executive functioning, right? And that does affect our quality of life. It does affect our mental health. When we are over and over and over and over again offline with our executive functioning, of course, your quality of life is disrupted. And when your quality of life is disrupted, I don't know one person that doesn't have a mental or emotional dilemma with this, that doesn't feel a sense of defeat almost. So please know I am in that boat too. So the need to control breeds a stress within us that can have serious physical implications. It compromises our mental health, and it also compromises our interpersonal relationships, but our physical health as well. Okay, our physical health. So man, autoimmune is on the rise. And for a couple reasons. One, because we're just understanding that these things exist. But two, I don't care what you say. Block me, delete me. You don't have to be here. I am a huge believer in psychosomatic things, and I believe I'm doing it to myself right now. So I have been experiencing these inflammatory bouts, and we're medically researching them, and I'm doing the right things. I'm going to make my doctor appointment. They started about 5 years ago, and they come in these little inflammatory batches where they hit me for a few weeks, and it's accompanied with gastro stuff, sensitivity in my eyes, sensitivity to coldness, weakness in my joints. And so I know very much. I have a very deep knowing. I've been referred to a rheumatologist, which I have stubbornly not gone yet. I'm working on it, people. But it's because I notice when I step back into alignment, these things sort of subside for me. And so it it begs the question, and it forces me to look inward and say, oh, how much am I influencing this or contributing to this that I do have control over? How much? Like true, and like I'm asking, I don't even know. So that's what I'm curious about right now. And that's what I'm inviting you to be curious about right now. This is what this is about. This is coaching through this, working through this, right? So here we go. So our last point. So our last point is about our physical health. Sorry, I thought somebody was at my door. Okay, so it affects our physical health. When we are in a constant state of control, the stress of maintaining that control on a constant basis, right? Always needing to, you can just feel it on a constant basis, releases hormones that suppress our immune system. Okay? Our bodies can only be on high alert and immune compromised for so long before we break down. It's just that simple. We cannot be dialed up all the time. We can be dialed in, but we cannot be dialed up all the time, okay? We cannot be on high alert all the time or our bodies will break down. So now becoming more prone to terminal illnesses like heart disease, diabetes, stroke, high blood pressure, and the very thing that took my mother, cancer. She survived a suicide attempt that put her in a coma for 4 days, that she survived, had to learn to walk again, moved through, only to 2 years later succumb to cancer, a very rare cancer of the peritoneum that took her life. Within 12 weeks of receiving the diagnosis, we didn't even know she was sick. I don't think she caused her own cancer. I do not have that authority over people's journeys to dare tell you anything like that. But what I can tell you, what I believe for me to be true, is that when we are on high alert all the time, and these stress hormones are flooding us all the time, and we are literally drowning ourselves in them, and we are breaking down our immune system, then what the fuck do you think is going to happen? I invite you to get real, people. I invite you to show up for yourself. I invite you to allow that. Tigress Tribe. I invite you, Spectral fans. Sorry. That's my YouTube, Tigress Tribe. You are my you know what? I am not sorry. You are my Tigress Tribe. I am the Peaceful Tigress. This is a project of the Peaceful Tigress, and I am damn proud of that. So yeah, Tigress Tribe. So it's just that simple. So I invite you to show up. I invite you to allow that for a minute, to sit with the discomfort and to explore within yourself if you have a desperate and defeating need to control and where it comes from and why. And here's the thing, we don't even really need to know where it comes from. Okay, so that's a lot of the, today. So when I go to therapy, I do a lot the somatic therapy and things like that. And there's inner child work and other things like that. And there's your traditional talk therapy and other things. And it is helpful to, I'm not saying don't explore, yeah, like know where it comes from. But the point that I made to my friend the other day on the podcast was that, with my co-host, was that once I realized what my vulnerability was, and that it was impacted by every trauma that I had ever gone through, that was the one theme that came out of each isolated trauma. I didn't need to go back and revisit every single trauma. I could climb out of the wreckage that was my childhood with an understanding of a singular theme that affects me the most, not the only one, but that affects me the most throughout all those traumas. And suddenly, just by that understanding, just by that awareness alone, it touched those traumas individually and kind of put a little blanket of healing over each one. I got more comfortable with uncertainty because I then understood, and I was able to say, okay, I can move through this. I can stabilize through this. And I invite you to do the same thing. And it showed up for me in the biggest way was the need to control. And so I invite you today to sit and figure out what is your thing. Is it control? Can you allow it? If you're here today, um, I'm going to assume it is, right? Because I believe we show up for what resonates with us. I believe we're guided. I believe that we're ushered into places and situations and conversations and certain dynamics, right? Even if they're uncomfortable, because we need to hear something, even if it's one sentence. So if you're here today, um, I challenge you to figure out what it is you need to take away from this. Um, and that's really all I have for you. I want to go into our next episode, will be um, how we practice the art of allowance, right? So, how do I do that? Now that I understand that that's what you meant by uncertainty and what was showing up for you, um, and how that manifests in so many people, well, how do I shift that? How do I get into that? And that is through high functioning perspective. And that's what we're going to talk about next time, is how can we get into a state of high functioning perspective so that we can allow, right? So we can master that art of allowance. Thank you so much for tuning into the Spectral Expansion Experience. I will be linking my tarot YouTube. I am a tarot reader, and they are a lot of these themes will crisscross. A lot of this dialogue will crisscross. A lot of these things will be repeated because I really just feel led. And that these things are connected. So I am the Peaceful Tigress, and the Spectral Expansion Experience is a project of mine. And so I do feel like they communicate with each other. And so you're going to hear a lot of similarities, and it's going to feel familiar, but one is delivered much differently, and one is expanded on in a much more freer space. And that is this space where I can say the F word because I like it. So have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Spectral Expansion Experience. I hope you grew with me, and I hope you see